I think one of the things for me was what was happening in the field of sociology of education, because all of the work in the 60s and into the 70s, we were very much influenced by the work of James Coleman and Christopher Jenks and all of those people that were really looking at the relationship between family background characteristics and the kinds of outcomes that we now know are associated with, with test scores and what have you at that time. They particularly looked at things like academic achievement. And the kinds of things that we were finding there were things that needed explanation. And the only way you can really get that explanation is to dig deep into what's actually going on in classrooms and schools. And my first ethnography was actually in community college, but then I went into a white working class high school. And anyway, I've done a number since. But it's always the, like Michelle is saying, and especially as a sociologist, it's always the digging underneath to see what produces those outcomes of interest, which is why mixed methods, not as a mantra, but as something that's actually living and breathing, can be a very, very exciting way to think about scholarly work, I think. Because it's a lot of those kinds of things that we know, like you say, quantitatively, we know certain things about those relationships, given the way we define variables and what have you, and the kind of tests we do, but we know certain kinds of things. But those people cannot tell us, other than maybe the people who talk about tracking, exactly what produces those kinds of relationships of interest on the ground of everyday practice. So it was that sort of scholarly work that was meshing with my own personal journey of being demoored that led me to really understand that that's where I belonged. And I'm not at all sorry I was so well trained quantitatively. I think it's allowed me and Michelle as well to sit at a lot of tables. And I also want to echo what you said, Michelle. I've increasingly begun to understand that if you don't have some kind of training in making connections and what's evidence and what kind of claims can you make, and how do you look at why the outliers are important to look at, you really end up making a lot of statements that you cannot really sustain very well.
Can you say a little bit more about that, or provide an example of how you think ethnographers can think productively about using quantitative work? I get sort of the point about, and I probably get this because I'm an ethnographer, about the value of ethnography at getting at the stories underneath and getting at the process and the production of things. But
I'm actually working on a team now. We're just about ready to release a statement, as I've mentioned to you on another point. But I don't know that ethnographers do need to do the quantitative work, actually. Some can do it if they so choose, if they're highly trained and so forth. Most probably will not. But I don't think that's the issue. I think the issue is we need, many ethnographers do not know the quantitative literature. And if you're studying, like I do, education and the production and amelioration of social and economic inequalities, you have to know what those quantitative people are saying, right? And you have to follow it very carefully, and it's got to be over time. And so in that way, that kind of work is exceedingly important, and we have to be in conversation with those people. The other thing that I think increasingly we're going to see larger teams that are going for certain kinds of grant money. And it is not true that the big places like NSF do not fund qualitative studies. They do. I have an NSF grant. But I think as we move forward, you will find certain spaces, and they might be certain universities that position in this way, certain spaces in which top quant people and top qual people are going to be sitting at the table together in order to pose those kinds of questions. And they can be iterative. A quant study can iteratively produce a qual study. A qual study can iteratively produce a quant study where you're trying to get underneath what variables mean or what have you. So, and the quant people want these qual people at the table now, just in terms of how they put together their instruments in many cases. What do things mean? So I think we're going to see more of that. It doesn't, but that means that there's got to be certain training, right? If I can no longer do the kind of modeling that some of my colleagues do, But I certainly can understand its logic. I can follow the discussion very well, and I know exactly what they're talking about, and I can understand how that can be in relation. And just one more thing, and I'll stop. I have never met a top quant person that doesn't deeply appreciate qual work. And I have frankly never met a top qual person who doesn't appreciate quant work. And by that, I don't mean descriptive statistics. I mean the real kind of work that attempts to explain relationships and what have you, and outcomes of interest through these models. So I think there's actually an academic future in this kind of work, not for everybody, but there will be some places where that is going to go on. They will be within and cross-university, and probably more likely cross-university teams, just because of the way we hire.